Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Tzeentch for the Shadows of Change DLC, where they are going to be included alongside Cafe and Kislev. Cafe is playable, though they have some really annoying issues to deal with. Kislev has a lot of issues, but you can still play their campaign and not feel like it's complete and utter misery. That, however, isn't the case for Tzeentch. Why is that? Well, let's consider the situation. Tzeentch does have the potential of getting some really powerful armies, but you're likely going to end up in a situation where in a campaign at Tzeentch at the moment, you're probably going to end up having to fight the vast majority of the battles manually. Even if you know you're going to win, even if you're going to swarm over the enemies, and you will because you do actually have a lot of power in battles, you're going to have to do it manually. That's the worst kind of auto-resolve situation where you know you're just going to walk over a lot of your enemies, but you still have to do it manually because of the faction mechanics. What are those faction mechanics? Well, the way Tzeentch is quote-unquote balanced is that they have barrier on all of their units, which replenishes in battle. The problem is that in auto-resolve that doesn't count. So during the course of an auto-resolve situation, your units will take a significant amount of damage against virtually every enemy. And you don't have good casualty replenishment. It ties in together. Poor problem with auto-resolve combined with casualty replenishment. Now, Tzeentch does have a good auto-resolve situation because Tzeentch does have quite a few units that are heavily armored. But that barrier should probably count for quite a bit more than it is right now because it is actually quite useful in battle, replenishing it, going back in. Tzeentch is actually really frustrating to deal with in battles because of the barrier, but that isn't really reflected on the campaign side of things. So it should be noted that Kairos, when you're playing on Legendary very hard, ends up dominating virtually the entire South, and he's not going to get kicked out of the South very easily. Because the AI doesn't have the same problems you do. So the AI does get a better auto-resolve situation. The AI does get good casualty replenishment. The problem for Tzeentch when it comes to casualty replenishment is there's only really 3 ways to increase it right now. So you have a research over here for the Scatter Loki, which also gives you a local recruitment capacity. This is probably the first research you want to get in your campaign. This takes 20 turns, by the way, to unlock, just to give you an idea, to get 5% casualty replenishment that many other races and other legendary lords get pretty much from the first few turns if they don't start with it, because they start with a hero that gives them more casualty replenishment than this. And on top of that, you can get a plus 8% for Forsaken and Spawn of Tzeentch. So enjoy playing with the Forsaken playstyle, because that's what you're going to be doing at Tzeentch, at least early in the campaign. And then the third way is Legions of Madness through the Blue Scale Line. Having to spend this many points just to get 6% casualty replenishment is not a great situation, though you probably would want to do it for the upkeep benefit from the Renowned and Fear and Called by Change. So you end up in this really frustrating situation in a campaign where if you're auto-resolving even battles that you are going to win, even if you're auto-resolving decisive victories, you are going to be hurt quite a lot, because while you will win that battle, it will significantly weaken you for other battles, like it has happened over here. As for how I got the Everwatch over here in this campaign, yeah, you do have to engage in a bunch of bullshit with Kairos when you're dealing with Techless and Oxyatl over here from pretty much the very start of your campaign. You're going to have to tackle those issues. So that's one problem, the casualty replenishment issue. The recruitment situation is also not that great. So you have a faction where it's very easy to take casualties, difficult to recover from those casualties, and furthermore, it's also difficult to recruit. You want to understand what makes the dwarves so bad? Yeah, this is what makes the dwarves bad. Poor casualty replenishment and limited recruitment, as well as significant costs. Not necessarily of recruitment, but of upkeep. Like, you can really reduce recruitment costs at Tzeentch and get, like, Chaos Warriors for, like, 600 or less than 600, or Forsaken for about the same money. And it's, by the way, weird with Chaos Warriors and Forsaken, because they cost the same in both upkeep and recruitment costs, but Warriors of Chaos of Tzeentch are the tier 3 unit, whereas Forsaken are a tier 2 unit. It's the same problem that Nakari has in their campaign, but Nakari has a great deal of potential through diplomacy, which you don't. You do have some benefits, but let's just say that in an enormous number of ways, you are far worse than Nakari. Nakari can really make things work because of the armies that Nakari can spawn, the cultist armies that you can spawn as Nakari, as well as forced vassalization or subjugation that you can do as Nakari. You do have some benefits with diplomacy as Tzeentch, but they're insignificant compared to what the benefits that Nakari has, because the Nakari improves diplomatic relations with a lot of factions through the cults, as well as the faction effects. You don't, but you kind of end up playing in the same way in quite a few ways. The reason I say you end up playing in a similar way is because, like Nakari, you can vassalize factions through diplomacy, but only through diplomacy. This doesn't work out as well as you might think, because unlike, say, the Tomb Kings, which also have this ability, you're a filthy demon. And guess what? A lot of people fucking despise you, for good reason. So the aversion that you're dealing with a lot of factions is really bad, but you need to engage in diplomacy in order to get them as vassals, which actually does give you a substantial amount of campaign power. And crucially, money. Like, for instance, here I vassalize Recarf, and I'm earning from Recarf 1,200 income per turn. If you're playing a Tzeentch campaign, you're pretty much reliant on this, but you are a demon still, remember that. You can still make it work by selling certain key territories, like over here I vassalized Recarf by selling him the Dusk Peaks and then giving him the Citadel of Dusk. The way this plays out is that if you're giving a faction a territory with a barracks, or a region with the barracks, they'll value that more in diplomacy. But also, like for instance, as I sold the Dusk Peaks first, that didn't give me as much to diplomacy, but the Citadel of Dusk was going to complete the province. AI does care about it, like AI values completing a province for diplomacy, because obviously commandments. And if you're also selling a region with the barracks, you gain a significant amount of diplomacy. This allows you to vassalize it. This is how you cheese diplomacy, by the way. Get tons and tons of money from factions for something like that. I also did the same thing with Clan Pestilent, and now look at me, I have 2 powerful factions as my vassals, and then there's also some Skaven over here. Also working on vassalizing Scarbrand, but that's really the only major benefit you have as Tzeentch. You can get vassalization going for diplomacy, but it works far worse than, say, the Tomb Kings or Nakari or Azazel even, than when it works. Let's not even compare how Tzeentch plays compared to the Warriors of Chaos, with respect to that. And the thing I'm gonna have to ask here with regards to Tzeentch as part of this DLC, why should I play Tzeentch as a player when I can play the Warriors of Chaos? Like, Village has a much better campaign, and Village is not exactly the best of the Warriors of Chaos, but if you're playing an undivided Warriors of Chaos, like Bellicor, Archeon, Kolic, you can get access to all of the Tzeentch units for the most part. You don't get access to all the Lord choices. You don't get access to a Keeper, to one of those superheroes. This, by the way, mod to recruit, defeat, and legendary lord mods, but you don't get access to the heralds of Tzeentch. Okay, big deal, don't care, right? I mean, obviously something, obviously like Lord of Change is always great to have in your campaign for their magical ability and their prowess on the battlefield in general, but that's kind of all you're really missing out, and you'll have a far less frustrating campaign with better mechanics if you're playing as the Warriors of Chaos. So Creative Assembly really needs to improve Tzeentch if they're going to make that work. Now, on top of that, on top of the casualty replenishment issue, the problem is that your unit roster, when we're looking at the unit roster, like, you will go Forsaken. Like, the best way to do it, and really the only way of doing it, DLC or not, is to go for the Many-Eye Tribute, get Forsaken as quickly as possible, eventually upgrade to Chaos Warriors, and that's it. Your armies are effectively going to look like they do here with a bunch of Forsaken, or like this one. Eventually you get Chosen, sure, you get Lords of Change, sure, but for the vast majority of your campaign, all of your armies are going to be copy-pasted of like the same kind of type, with Regiments Renowned thrown in the mix as well. Maybe some Chariots, a couple of things, but never bother recruiting like the blue horrors or the pink horrors or even the exalted pink horrors because they're just not worth it as units. Well, exalted pink horrors can be worth it, don't get me wrong on that, can be worth it to an extent, but Forsaken and Warriors of Chaos will just do a much better job. And it's not like exalted pink horrors are cheap units to recruit. Remember that. There are benefits with Screamers of Tzeentch and Flamers of Tzeentch, but the range unit that Tzeentch does have significant issues on the battlefield, either because they don't have the range or the firepower or the durability. Like Flamers, yeah, they can do a great deal of damage, sure, if you're using them, if they actually shoot. And a lot of people have problems with getting them to actually shoot during the course of a battle, which is a pretty big problem to deal with when you have a flamethrower unit. Like, it's an issue in general with flamethrower units, the gunpowder units, because they're operating on some logic. Line of sight is a major problem for these units. A handful of them, yeah, they can work. More than that, like more than 4 units in an army, no, absolutely not worth it. So Forsaken and Warriors of Chaos into Chosen, that's your playstyle, which is pretty damn boring. Like, look at the Warriors of Chaos, like just a direct comparison. Warriors of Chaos, for any of the Legendary Lords, have a lot more versatility in their types of armies. Between the units they can get, right, from dedicated to gods, the units they can recruit by default, like be it Trolls, for instance, or Dragon Ogre Shaggoths, Hell Cannons. Tzeentch just feels significantly more limited to play, and the recruitment is more annoying, because as opposed to the Warriors of Chaos and their incredible upgrade system of the Warband upgrade, you actually have to recruit units in a regular fashion. And you can only get Chaos Warriors, baseline Chaos Warriors at tier 3, and Halberds at tier 4, so those Chosen are tier 5 unit. You can get far more powerful armies, far more easier if you're playing the Chaos Warriors, and you can diversify your armies far better if you're playing the Chaos Warriors. Then there's the economy, because in order to maintain these very expensive units, you're going to need a good economy, which you don't have unless you put in a lot of work for it. So, let's go over it. The baseline economic building for Tzeentch. Keeping in mind, Tzeentch cannot trade, so that's a significant downside. But the base economic building for Tzeentch only generates 100 income. Now, it's not the same problem as Kislev. These economic structures are like half the cost of Kislev. I guess they did that for quote-unquote balance reasons, because Kislev can trade and you can't. But you can go to 150 if the Winds of Magic are strong or higher, and also get the growth benefit. Getting high Winds of Magic as Tzeentch is not a problem, because you do have a commandment that it gives you the chance of increasing it, so you really won't have an issue of maintaining it. But the way the Tzeentch economy works is kind of like the Skaven economy, though worse than the Skaven economy. Yes, worse, because all the Skaven buildings generate some money, and the way that plays out is you get the reactor building, and that massively boosts the economy of that entire province. That's a similar way to how the Warriors of Chaos also work. Like, you get one economic building, then you have a shrine that buffs the economic potential of your entire province by quite a bit. That's how Warriors of Chaos make money. As Tzeentch, you have to take entire provinces like the Skaven and build economic buildings in all of them, going all the way to like 300 income if you have Winds of Magic that are strong, remember that. And then you can buff this up with the Warp Lymph. And this gives you up to 30% income from all buildings in the local province. 15% if you don't have Winds of Magic, 30% if you have strong Winds of Magic. This does end up working, and you do end up having a significant economy, but there's a lot of effort put into it. Like this province over here, the starting province that I have, this is turn 52 of a campaign. And the problem with this is, like, it's slow. It takes time. You have to invest a significant amount of resources in order to get this done. Also, annoyingly, that the provincial capitals don't have this, the Warp Lymph. They have instead the library chain. And this does achieve the same thing, and it does give you grimoires as well, sure. But it does cost quite a bit more, and it requires you to get up to tier 4 in order to take full advantage. You get the same kind of economic advantage you get from a tier 3 building in minor settlements. As for resource buildings, they give you that 15%, but it ends up being worse than the Warp Lymph. So you basically want to build a Weave of Times and Warp Lymphs in every settlement, and then once you get to tier 3, get the resource building for the resource buildings for the extra benefit. Keep in mind though, the resource buildings are cheaper, but the effect they provide is lesser than what the warp lymph does. That's the price. I think like resource buildings should justify themselves. Like if you capture resources, that should feel like significant. So I think like resource buildings, like if Creative Assembly wants to improve Tzeentch's economy, Tzeentch needs to generate more income as a baseline from the economic buildings, because 150 when you can't trade, when the greenskins have cheaper buildings, they can't trade, they get more income from sacking settlements than Tzeentch does. They can trade. Like, greenskins are kind of in a similar boat in the sense that, as the demons, in the sense they can trade, a lot of factions hate them. But here's the thing, the greenskins have a far better baseline economy because they go 250 by default, and they get significantly more from sacking and looting settlements. You can get more than the greenskins do because of all the benefits from the warplane chain, sure, but you will ultimately generate far less money than the greenskins. So I think like either reduce the costs of buildings for Tzeentch or improve the income, like easily double it from 100 to 200, 250, 300 even at tier 1, going to like 600 or so at tier 3. And even then you'd still have a lesser economy than some people like the Dark Elves. You want to talk about like a good economy, Dark Elves, High Elves, others. And the thing is, Tzeentch units are expensive, so you are going to lack the tools, and effectively your campaign can be over if you lose one crucial battle. Now, this is the case in other campaigns, but good races, including the Warriors of Chaos, what makes them good is not their ability to dominate the map in short order, though also that is a factor. It's their ability to take losses and keep going. If I were to lose a battle with Kairos or Sarfarol over here, it would be a significant downside, though at this point I wouldn't lose the campaign because I have enough territory that it's safe. But it would certainly put me on the back foot. But earlier on, within the first 20, 30 turns, the start is so terrible because of the economic situation alongside the economic situation alongside the casualty replenishment situation makes it, alongside the recruitment situation, makes it so that if you lose a single battle, you're pretty much over. This is not the case for quite a lot of races. You can afford to take losses. And that's the thing, like, what's the reason do I have to play Tzeentch as opposed to Warriors of Chaos? Hell, I honestly think to myself, like, it might actually be better if that Legendary Lord that they're going to include in the DLC was a Warriors of Chaos Legendary Lord, though obviously there's a lot of Warriors of Chaos Legendary Lords, so we'll see what they do with Hellbrass, what kind of mechanics they can do to improve them. But if they're just going to start them in Kislev, that will make things better just because of the forced vassalization, or the vassalization we will be able to achieve, but it still will be misery and far weaker than what a Warriors of Chaos Legendary Lord can do with the similar starting situation, starting army, and so on. Then there is the research tree. The research tree overall, just feels rather weak. And when you're looking at Tzeentch, be it research or buildings or even the Lord skill lines, I'm not talking about the Chaos Sorcerer Lords. I'm talking here about Kairos. I'm talking here about the Heralds of Tzeentch. Their skill line is just such a gigantic mess. Like, looking at their skill line, maybe this feels appropriate for Tzeentch, but like, consider the situation, like what you're getting and what kind of units. Like, oh, you can get melee attack and charge bonus and speed. Okay, sure. I mean, eventually you can get leadership, missile resistance, other things, but it just feels like it's really, really messy. And yes, you can get quite a lot of armor for Chaos Warriors later on, but early on it does feel like a gigantic mess of a skill tree, and the way things are structured just doesn't really make sense. Also, what doesn't really make sense is, like, when you're looking at the Chaos Sorcerer Lords of Tzeentch, they're also not necessarily in a great situation, though they are better than the regular Lords. Though they are a DLC choice. Keep in mind, you need to own Champions of Chaos to get them, but these guys are far better because they give you armor for all non-demonic infantry units, which, yes, includes Chaos Warriors. which is something that's quite important. Or does it? Is it bugged? I do wonder. I do have to wonder if it's... No, it's not bugged. I just don't have it. Let's take a look over here, because I do certainly have it. Yeah, you do get extra armor. So the DLC stuff from Champions of Chaos, which are much better to play by default, do benefit Tzeentch, but the way they added those things in, the lords, the units, into these demonic factions for all the demonic factions wasn't done in the best possible way. That, I think they could further refine that, how they added those units, and I do go back to that point I've made again and again. Why should I want to play Tzeentch as opposed to playing the Warriors of Chaos? Maybe the new units, but if they're just going to add new units that are going to be higher tier and I won't be able to afford in a campaign for like 40, 50 turns, then that's not good enough incentive, Creative Assembly. The way the demonic races feel like they were designed, it was for a slower, more, for a slower, more, a smaller campaign. That's how it feels like Creative Assembly designed Tzeentch and a lot of other factions and races in Warhammer 3. And all of them, with the exception of Grand Cafe, suffer immensely because of this. That's something they need to change from the perspective of the economy, the units, the casualty replenishment, the research tree. And then we do also have the changing of ways. Now, what's annoying here is you need to unlock it via research. Like, if you could get this faster and easier, like, there might be reasons, but like, should I really spend the points to just halt the faction? I mean, it's worth it, undeniably so. It is worth it. Some of the stuff like Force of Rebellion, halt faction, these kind of things are worth it to get, but a lot of these things just feel like fluff, like feels pointless. It does feel like Creative Assembly did add a lot of features without really thinking things through about how viable those features were going to be and how much of an incentive players would have. I'd say the biggest problem with Tzeentch is that while you certainly can play them right now, it's like it's a very limited campaign. You'll feel extremely frustrated playing it, and you'll have far less tools to deal with all of the issues that you do have. Like, consider the situation Kairos finds himself in. The Southern Chaos Waste is a massive area, and yet you're going to struggle for a long time to even afford 2 armies, let alone 3 or 4. I mean, it's only at this point, 52 turns in, with a lot of resources and 2 vassals that are buffing my economy by quite a bit, that I'm looking to afford 4 of them. Maybe I could push 5 if I really wanted to, but I would be going bankrupt with 5. Compared to other factions that might maintain 10 armies by this point, including, yes, Kislev could maintain far more armies that would be more powerful than anything that I could do. And when I'm saying Kislev could do better, you'd understand how bad this race, this faction is. So improvement to economy, improvement to unit recruitment. Doesn't make sense that Chaos Warriors are a tier 3 unit compared to Forsaken. Give us that choice. Also doesn't make sense that Chaos Warriors with Halberds are a tier 4 unit. Just feels like, oh, we want to have stuff that's there at tier 4. That's just really frustrating. Also, hero capacity, tier 5 for Chaos Sorcerers of Tzeentch. Yay, that's great. Compared to, like, the hilarious part, you want to play the Sorcerer faction, the Sorcerer race? You could get such a ridiculous amount of sorcerers playing the Warriors of Chaos, it's not even funny. In fact, you won't even know what the hell to do with them because you get so many when you're playing any of the Warriors of Chaos. Like, yeah, Village is much better to play, and Village isn't the best. Hell, Archeon is better to play, just go down that Tzeentch theme. So, again, I emphasize, why should people play Tzeentch as opposed to playing the Warriors of Chaos? Like, unless you're a masochist who enjoys pain and suffering, I suppose. But there's no mechanic here, no flavor to Tzeentch, or very little that makes playing this race, playing this faction, worth it at the moment. That's the biggest concern, I think. Like, either new mechanics, combined with rebalancing, redesign, maybe even from the ground up, that's what Tzeentch needs. We'll see what Creative Assembly ends up doing. Costin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.